actually laboratory-based, which we then take to the field to see whether or not the laboratory studies actually hold up in real life. As an older senior professor, I mean really older, as you age, you become more intent on making on your research actually making a difference. So hopefully I'll be able to show you whether or not, or give you the opportunity to decide whether or not this does or has, and whether it will make a difference potentially in your country. I'll start with a campaign that my country ran a little while ago, called the National Youth Anti-Drug Media Campaign. And I'll tell you at the start that this campaign was a massive failure. And throughout the course of my presentation, I'll tell you why. This cost us $1.4 billion. It ran for 4 years and involved every citizen in the entire country. It's a massive media campaign where every known medium was used. Television, radio, magazines, billboards, signs on buses, you name it, all directed toward adolescents and all focused primarily on misuse of marijuana and a little bit more on inhalants, on inhalant drugs, solvents. The campaign had so-called experts visiting Washington every 6 months to look at progress, to inspect the data. Data were continuously collected. And people like me would go there and look at the data and then talk to the people who were responsible for giving the money to run the campaign. The campaign's funds came directly from the president, out of the president's office, all that money. And every 6 months, I remember going to Washington and looking at the data and getting more and more worried because the data were flat. Nothing was happening. And yet it was costing us $1 billion, more than that, almost $1.5 billion to run the campaign. And at some point, one of us, I think it was me, finally said to a man from the president's office, "You know why this campaign doesn't work?" "No, why is that?" "Because the ads that you're putting out on every known medium are not persuasive. They're silly. They're a waste of your time and waste of money." We were buying ads on primetime television that cost us $100,000 a minute. And the ads were ridiculous. They wouldn't persuade my 3-year-old, much less a 16-year-old who, when that 3-year-old became 16, wouldn't listen to me under any circumstances. So we tried to figure this out. And ultimately, they wouldn't listen. Sometimes people in positions of authority don't listen to professors. Sometimes I don't blame them. And what the data ultimately showed was that the more exposure to these ads children had, the adolescents had, the worse it was, the more drugs they used of all sorts. This is a massive failure, where not only doesn't the campaign operate properly, but it operates in reverse of what you wanted. So that made me decide to really get serious about what we're doing and try to decide what to do. This is a picture of one of our national surveys. It runs from year 2000 to the year 2015. I could have gotten more recent data, but the data are the same. This lower line is from usage of, it's from marijuana use by youth, despite combined effects of supply and demand reduction. So everything we can do to stop this use, and look at what happens in children in the 8th grade of school. 8th grade means about 14 years old. What you see here is a flat line. We spent billions of dollars on that flat line, on doing everything we could do to stop drug use in children. And this is what we accomplished. Among 10th graders, these kids are 16, we find this, and among 12th graders, 18, final year of high school, ready to leave and either go to university or go into the job force, what we find is an average use of now around 45% of those kids have used or are using this drug. If you were grading this, what would you give it? What grade would you give it? We have failed. We spent billions and billions of dollars, and we haven't affected that curve even a little bit. We haven't dropped it. This thing should be going down. Should we care? Do we care if our kids use marijuana? Well, you make the decision. I'll let you decide. This is a value choice. Does it matter to you? Well, kids who we know from our lots of research, the kids who are children, or almost everybody in this room to me could be my kid, right? Given my age. So I'll refer to these our subjects. They're adolescents as kids because that's what they are. Look, okay, so they have harder time learning in school. They're less likely to graduate from high school. They're more likely to have high levels of delinquency or aggression with peers and with family. But their poor relations with parents, greater risk of contracting sexually transmitted diseases, more positive attitudes toward drugs, worse friends, addiction. Now we have, in the United States, given the strength of the marijuana that we've now bred, that we've now created, we have more youth going to hospital for addiction to marijuana than all other drugs combined. When I was a kid, smoking marijuana, being addicted to marijuana was impossible. It wasn't that strong. Now, according to NIDA, National Institute on Drug Abuse, the potency of marijuana is 17 times greater than when I was your age. But that is a serious struggle. It wasn't when I was a kid. When I was a kid, it was sort of fun. You have a much higher risk if you're using these drugs as an adolescent for more dangerous drug use as you get older, according to our statistics. These are United States data. They may not apply to Colombia, but I think they do. In our recent National Academy of Sciences, the absolute top group of scientists in our country who are members of the National Academy found that heavy use of marijuana in young kids, young adolescents, before the young adolescents now, in their definition, means before the age of 25, stops brain development when it starts. So depending, if you're a youngster, the brain develops from the back to the front, right? You know that. So if I start using marijuana heavily as a young kid, my brain development stops about here. That means I'm going to act like a kid when I'm my age, which is not charming. If I start when I'm 20 and my brain hasn't totally developed yet, that means my development is going to stop around here. If I start with heavy use, consistent heavy use. Okay, I'm not talking about having a joint now and then. So I don't want to lose credibility right at the beginning. I'll lose it later. But if you're using heavy-duty marijuana when you're about 20 years old and your brain hasn't fully developed, it's going to stop it. Now, what do we care about? Well, this is where the quality of your decision making. This is where the quality of your decisions occur. This determines how much risk you're willing to take stupidly. Right? Some risks you have to take, some you don't. So you decide if that's worth worrying about. For me, it is. And so I've devoted quite a bit of time to this in my research. But it isn't just marijuana that I'm worried about. I'm worried about everything. Here's some research we did that looked at persistent use of substances that in my country, we call kit drugs. Kit drugs are things like cigarettes, alcohol, marijuana, and inhalants. Inhalants are solvents. I'm not sure what they're called here. Yeah, it's the same. Huh? I've been struck since being here, both in Medellin and here, at how similar our countries are in terms of all sorts of things. I think that Colombians are more polite in general, but otherwise it's pretty similar. These are odds ratios. Not what's an odds ratio? An odds ratio represents the odds, the likelihood that an outcome will occur given a particular exposure. So it's odds ratios are used largely in medical research. We've stolen them in my research. Compared to the odds of the outcome occurring in the absence of that exposure. So what's the exposure? The exposure is at least 2 years of consistent use of these drugs. So if you have a child, some older people, if you have a child who's used cigarettes consistently for 2 years, the odds of that kid beginning to use opioids is 2.5 times greater than if she didn't smoke. And the odds of her using stimulants is almost 4 times greater than if she didn't smoke. That's a big number. We're talking about this affects your life. How about alcohol? Alcohol's worse. If you get a kid who consistently drinks alcohol for 2 years before we take our measurements, that kid is 3 times more likely to graduate to opioids or to use opioids in the future, and 3.3 times more likely to use stimulants. Stimulants meaning things like methamphetamines or even prescription stimulants that are being misused, used not for the right purpose. Marijuana gets worse, almost 4 times more likely to use opioids with consistent use of marijuana for a couple of years before we took our measures. 5.5 times more likely to use stimulants. With inhalants, it's horrible. If you have a child that is using inhalants, you grab him fast and take him somewhere. Because that kid's likelihood of using opioids as he gets older is almost 10 times greater than a kid who's not using inhalants, and almost 13 times greater for that kid to use stimulants. So this is a really bad, dangerous drug. You also can die from inhalant use. And in my research, we found that there is such a thing as what is called sudden death syndrome, where a child might be using inhalants for a number of years. No problem. All of a sudden he dies. Without any warning, without any particular reason. It just happens. Usually when that happens, the entire community is demoralized. They do something, but the kid is still dead. So you need to watch out for these drugs. They're horribly dangerous. And my country, at least, does almost nothing in terms of prevention. We invest almost no money in prevention. We just don't do it. And why we don't do it? Because only 10% of the population use inhalants in my country. But those 10% are mostly young children. Children who are too young to be able to afford marijuana. So they're 10 years old. And they know nothing. What really got me started in this whole field of research is I remember dealing with a school called us in to help them. They were having a big inhalant problem among their student body. Some kids were getting really, really messed up, really in trouble. They said, "Can you come in and help us?" I said, "Well, we've got to talk to the kids first and find out what they think." And I remember one kid telling me, "Well, see those guys over there? Yeah, they're the most popular guys in school. If I use inhalants, and they all use inhalants, if I use inhalants, I'll get to be popular too." And I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, that's not what they taught me in my logic classes. It's backwards. And you say, but you can't blame them. These are little kids who are talking. They don't make any sense in most circumstances, and certainly not when they're talking about drugs. So we tried to figure out what can we do, and I'll talk to you a little bit about some of those findings later. So we've gone into the field, and not just we, the other people in my country have gone into the field and tried to stem the tide of drug use. And they have failed. People in my field using the media. Why have they failed? They fail because they don't understand the media. My training in psychology was in social psychology and specifically on communication and persuasion. So I claim to know something about persuasion and communication. And I know about the mass media. Here's why we failed when we use the media to try and persuade people in general. First of all, we don't understand this media. We don't understand what they're created to do, what they're designed to do, and what they're not designed to do. We ask much more of the media than the media can deliver. It just can't do some of the things we ask. If I try to use the media to try and influence a person addicted to cocaine or to heroin to stop, I'm going to fail. The media cannot do that. I might get the media to persuade the person to ask somebody for help, maybe to talk to a parent or a friend or a priest or whatever. But to try and make that person quit by force of what I persuade them to do, it's nonsense. It won't work. It doesn't do it. I don't know of a single case in all the literature that I've read about. And I've been reading about this literature since 1960. That's when I first got interested in persuasion, as a young guy in college. We don't understand principles of persuasion. There are 60 years of evidence-based research on persuasion. If you look at most prevention ads, if you look at most ads, no matter whether it's prevention or not, what you will find is that they're not persuasive. There's no reason for you to do this. No reason. Think about it. Next time you see an ad for a car or for Coca-Cola or something like this, ask yourself after this lecture, is that ad persuasive? And most of the time you'll say, no, they're wasting your money. A lot of times we use the media to persuade. We think just if I tell you something, this drug will kill you, but it will mean that you won't use it anymore. That's nonsense. It doesn't work that way. Information doesn't persuade, it just informs. And sometimes the information, even if it is persuasive, doesn't make a big difference to you. Finally, if you don't understand how these features interact with each other, how they inform each other, then you're also in trouble. So the question is, so why bother with the media? For all sorts of reasons. One, they're immediate. If something is going on and I need to get the word out to the community, like in LA 2 weeks ago when there was a drug on the street that was killing kids, what we needed to do was get on TV, on radio, and say, if you have a packet that has this symbol on it, it's heroin, this symbol, don't use it because eight people have died from this drug already, and death stopped. So one of the advantages of media is that they are immediate. They get out there immediately. And that was a case of simple information. We didn't try to persuade kids. We didn't try to say, hey, don't do this if you might kill you, might do this. No, we didn't. We said 8 people died from this drug. If it has this symbol, don't use it. And people to stop using it. In general, however, most of our most of our media campaigns are stuck at that point of informing you about things and assuming, well, since you're a reasonable person and you know these drugs will hurt you in high school, therefore you won't use them. And a guy comes up to me and says, yeah, but my best friend uses this drug and wants me to try it. He's just offered me a joint. What do you want me to do? Say no and look like a sissy, like a pansy? No, I'm not going to say no to that. That's more important to me than the trouble that I might get into if I use this drug. Okay. I mean, from a certain point of view, kids' point of view, at least that makes pretty good sense. Not the people. And so we need to understand what the media does, what it can, how it can have an effect. So let's talk about the media. What does the media do? What's its function? Well, media has 3 functions. Well, it has 1,000 functions, but we have time to talk about it. 3 major functions. One of them is to engage you, right? If I put something on TV and you refuse to watch it because it's so boring, I'm out of luck. It's not going to matter. The other is to inform you. and the other is to persuade you. So there are three different functions of media, and in drug prevention, we need to do all three of them. One of them won't work. If I just engage you, if I give you a really snappy presentation, it's really gorgeous, and you look at it and say, "Wow, look at that," but it doesn't inform you, or if it doesn't persuade you, it won't affect your behavior. You'll do whatever you want. So it'll be a waste of time and money, waste of your time, and my money to do that. So you need all three, and they have to be done well. If you can't do that, then stay home. We say, go home, lie down until it goes away. So what are the critical features? What I'm going to tell you on this slide is based on research that goes all the way back to the 1950s. Evidence-based, hard experimental research. The first thing in any kind of persuasive context is that you have to assume that your audience is going to resist. To me, prevention involves persuasion, and persuasion involves resistance. If you don't resist, then it's not persuasion, then I'm just reinforcing it. If I say, don't do drugs, they'll hurt you, and you say, well, I don't do drugs, thank you for telling me that. That's reinforcing. There's nothing wrong with it, but it doesn't going to persuade you if you're a user. So you assume initial resistance. That's the first order of business. That line is written in bold print on the walls of my laboratory. Some resistance. Because you can come up with a gorgeous ad, but if it's easily resisted, forget about it. Media try to do three things. A persuasive message does three things. One of them is it raises a question in your mind. Are you sure that that drug doesn't hurt you? I'm just asking you a question. And then I have to provide, and then the message has to provide an answer to that question. Well, actually, research from Universidad Bosque has shown that this drug can hurt you. Can do this, this, and this. And then it has to reinforce you to accept the message. What does that mean? It means I have to offer you something for you to accept my message and reject your own established belief. This research was done by the most famous research psychologist in the whole country. Do you want to be on his side or do you want to be on your buddy's side who says, oh, this won't hurt you? Who's smarter? Who knows? It's reinforcing to be on the right side. We like that. To that standard, that we know that we've known this for 40 years. Doing it is difficult, but knowing it is pretty easy. But how do you also add to this? Well, we add to it by what has been missing in a lot of our communication and persuasion approaches, which is we don't target the communication to people that we want to influence. So if I tell a group of 80-year-olds, don't smoke marijuana, it might hurt you, don't start smoking marijuana, I mean, it's like, what? Why are you wasting your time? They're going to do something else. They're not going to be smoking that stuff. Right? So what we need to do is figure out who is our audience. You have to make that choice. What medium do they use? So in the United States, we don't use drug prevention ads on television anymore for adolescents, because adolescents don't watch television. It's not very much. They're much more intent on looking at not even Facebook anymore. It changes literally from one month to the next, but now it's Instagram and things of that sort. So we ask people, well, what medium are you using? We don't use that terminology, but that's what we ask. And they tell us that, and then we aim our persuasive messages through that medium. To do it otherwise is stupid, because I'm telling an adolescent not to smoke marijuana, and their parents are watching it, but not the kids. Okay, that probably doesn't work. Although, I'll show you a case where it does. So how can we integrate these positive features of drug prevention and so forth? We developed a model for messaging. My group is interested in how do you create messages that work? How do you create a persuasive message that actually makes a difference? And we formed this algorithm called EQUIP. In English, it makes sense. In Spanish, not so much. Make up your own number. But the functions are this. Why should we do this? Well, because EQUIP integrates essential features. This is brand new. This isn't even out yet. The preprint of this chapter that my colleagues and I wrote is out, and it's been read by at least 500 people in our field, professional persuasion guys in the drug prevention field. So I think it's going to have an impact when it finally does come out. It integrates what we just talked about. It details critical features of persuasion. Basically, it's a recipe book to say, okay, you want to create a persuasive message, it has to do these things. Each letter of EQUIP stands for, in order, what you need to do. What do you need to do? First of all, you need to engage. You got to get them to listen. If they're not listening or watching or reading what you're trying to get them to do, I mean, you've already lost the game. Forget about it. You go home and go to bed. Next question, next idea, next thing that the message has to do is question. You have to raise a question in the person's mind. Are you sure about this? Not criticize, nothing like that. Are you certain? Just get somebody to consider a possibility that other people might not think the same way that they do. And then we destabilize the attitude. How do we do that? Through information. We give them information that says, actually, you know what? You're wrong. But we do it in a way that we never say you're wrong, because then they'll resist you. You don't want to create more resistance than you've already got to handle to begin with. Right? And then finally, persuade. And what does that mean? That means you provide incentives. You say, well, wouldn't you be on the side of this noted psychobiologist who's done 50 years of research on this issue and says this versus what your friend Harry says next door? It's more reinforcing to be on the right side in that case. Or wouldn't you rather trust 4 years of hard scientific evidence versus what your Uncle Sam told you? We assume when we create the model, we assume resistance. It integrates all of the functions of persuasion that we know work over the past 60 years of research. It's all evidence-based. There's not a single opinion in this thing. It assumes the appropriate audience will be targeted. It doesn't assume it requires. And it supplies a framework. A lot of times when I teach a course on persuasion, before this model, people would say, well, you've taught us 30 different things that we need to do about a message. How do we create these things? It's all over the map. This is how you do it. Not just you, but also people in your government, people at the highest levels of health and communication ought to be thinking about a systematic way to create messages that actually operate as you want them to do. Not because some guy sat in his office one afternoon and said, hey, wow, this is a great idea, why don't we do it? Here's a great idea that somebody came up with. This was a signature advertisement of a very, very expensive campaign in the United States. I've translated the script, the whole script of the ad. The ad is about 30 seconds. By the way, the EQUIP model, if you want to write a 30-second ad, you have to do all of those things. Not just one. Because one, you waste your money. So the ad says, well, you can read that better than I can, okay? Here's what the ad says.
Okay, last time. This is drugs. This is your brain on drugs. Any question?
Any questions? Okay, when you ask a person my age, you remember this is your brain on drugs? Oh yeah, that ad, I remember that ad, the broken egg and so forth. Your brain was an egg, or there was something about an egg in there. It got me hungry for breakfast. But it's not. But did it persuade? Everybody remembered the ad. Everyone who saw it remembered it. I see it. I see it in my dreams sometimes, even my bad dreams. But did it persuade him? No. Our research showed it didn't make a bit of difference. Had no difference whatsoever to what people thought. Why is that? Because it didn't do anything. How does it stack up relative to the equip model? Did it satisfy our criteria? Did it engage you? Yeah, I mean, it's fun to watch that egg frying. And then the fried egg. Did it raise a question in your mind? I don't think so. Well, what was the question? Did it undermine your belief about drugs? No, I don't think so. Didn't do it. Did it inform you? No. Even if you passed the other two tests, it didn't tell you what to do about it or how to avoid frying your brain. Frying your brain is a common term in at least American English. Oh, I got fried last night. Well, that means you did too much of a substance that you shouldn't have. Did it persuasive? Was it persuasive? No. It's even if you think it's telling you to avoid a drug, it's not telling you how to do it, why you should do it, and so it's not going to succeed. And it didn't. It did not succeed. It didn't do anything other than they wasted a lot of money. It could have been spent on actual prevention. Would have been nice. So we're stuck with stuff like this. Why? Well, because it's flashy. You go to a marketing department and say, hey, I need a flashy flashy ad about drugs. Do something for me. They show you this. And you don't know much about persuasion. You look at it and say, oh, that's good. Let's do it. So you do it. And then your research says, this didn't work. You're in deep trouble. Okay, so what do? Everyone remembers it. There's a difference between memorability and persuasion. And that's why the ad only satisfied our engage criteria, not even that very well. So how do we enhance these effects? First requirement, use the model to design your messages. Don't sit in a room some afternoon and decide something. Look at what the model wants you to do. Then make resistance difficult, impossible, or apparently unnecessary. Then target or tailor the right audience, and then engage parents in adolescent substance use prevention campaigns. Parents are really, really important if you're worried about adolescent drug use. We divide our samples typically into resolute non-users, vulnerable non-users, we call these people at risk, and users. This is different from the usual approach where you are really differentiating among users, but not non-users. We do it differently because we believe it's easier to prevent initiation than to stop it once it starts. Stopping it once it starts is really difficult because having a lot of people using drugs is pleasant. You like it. It's just that there's such a high price to be paid for that pleasantness. Example. We had an audience of kids. I told you about these children at the school that were overusing inhalant drugs. We were called to the school and said, can you help us? Yeah, we said, sure we can. We didn't know. We had no idea, but we thought we could. So we parsed these children that they're resolute non-users. I don't use this drug, I never will. Some of them do, but in general, they're harder to move. You want them to stay where they are. Vulnerable non-users who say, I don't use it now, but I might, I don't know, I'm thinking about it. And then users. We used a thing called misdirection. We used three levels of usage. We had a source who was an attractive high school student or a medical doctor. It was the same woman. In one case, she's dressed in scrubs and a stethoscope, and we filmed her in a doctor's office, or in a hospital, sorry. Another case, she looked like a teenager, older, a high school child, rather than a middle school child, which is who we were dealing with. She looked the same, except she was wearing blue jeans and a sweater, sneakers. And we changed the apparent target of communication. We played this ad in the kids' schools. Schools had a TV set that played educational programs called Channel 1, and we took over one of the ads, 60 seconds. So on comes an ad for Hewlett Packard computers, place for a minute and a half. After the program, then our ad comes on. And the ad shows this young woman sitting on a desk, dressed in young kid, high school girl clothes, and she says one of two things. She says, we use different classrooms. She says, students, there's something I need to talk to you about with respect to inhalant drugs. Or she says, parents, there's something I need to talk to you about with respect to inhalant drugs. That's the only difference. What she starts out with, parents or kids. Why do we do that? Because we're trying to avoid resistance. Why would you resist a communication to your mother? Turns out you don't. That ad, that presentation, had considerably more effect than the one directly focused on the child himself. Simple 1 or 2 word difference in the ad makes for massive acceptance of the information. If you're playing it to my mother, because I'm not resisting it, and if you don't resist the communication and process it open-mindedly, I really got you. You'll buy my pitch, you'll buy my product. If you resist, then who knows? I hope that's not me. Did I set the house on fire? I think Talking Heads had a song about this one. Yeah, I know.
20. You need 20 minutes.
Okay. Okay, we're going to sit here till we burn.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Well, listen, while they're finding out, let me continue because I'm really going long. This could be the last thing you ever hear. So I'll try and make it really good. Okay, how do parents play into all of this? I'm skipping because I'm short. Andrew Lack and I, a former student of mine, glorious student, did a meta-analysis of 17 studies looking at the relationship between parental monitoring and drug use in kids. We found a significant relationship between how strongly the parent watched their own kids and the likelihood of that child using marijuana. The relationship was highly statistically significant. And in note, we analyzed 17 studies. There were total number of about 35,000 parent-child pairs involved in the study. The analysis was significantly stronger in female-only samples. Girls were more attuned to parental monitoring than the boys were, cared more about it. And when we define parental monitoring in terms of knowledge of the child versus just merely watching the kid, we found a much stronger relationship. Where does a parent get knowledge from the child about what they're doing? By self-disclosure, by the child telling the parents. When would a child tell the parents what he's up to? When there's a warm relationship between the parent and the child. So that got us into thinking, well, maybe parental warmth is really the operating feature here. Maybe that matters. That's an important question in American society because a lot of times parents are called helicopter parents. They helicopter in, do something with a kid, and helicopter out. They don't have a close relationship with their kids. That's not the majority, but there's enough to swing the data around. So what we thought was self-disclosure is a proxy measure, a semi-good measure for parental closeness, parent-child closeness. So does it matter? For kids, it's really attuned to what their parents think, what they say, and so forth. Christopher Lamb and I did a study where we were interested in what we call the self-fulfilling prophecy. So if I expect you to be a thief, chances are more likely you're going to steal stuff. It's a very weird phenomenon, but how about if I'm a parent and I think you're using drugs? Chances are you're going to use them. That's what the theory says. Is it right? Well, I don't know. Let's try it. Let's see. We took children and parents, we went to their houses, hundreds of them, and interviewed them with all sorts of things. But here's the question we asked. Have you used marijuana in the past year? We asked that to the kids. So time one. Also, we asked the parent, has your kid used any sorts of drugs in the past year? Or ever? Parents in different rooms, they didn't know what their kid said, and they would say yes or no. A year later, we went back to those houses and talked to the kids. And we asked them, over the past year, have you used any marijuana or any drug? Kid said yes or no. We took the data. Now we take all of the kids from time one who said, no, I've never used marijuana. And we asked, and these are the kids whose parents say, no, he's never used marijuana. And this is what happened. In year two, when we asked the kid, have you used it? About 10% of them now say, yes, I have. That's about the average growth rate of marijuana use among this age group, 12 to 18, in our samples. So we believe the data. What about the kids who said, no, I don't, but the parent says, yeah, I think he did. We go to those kids the next year. What we find there is 30% of them are using the drugs that next year. Isn't that interesting? Now, if you're a cynic out there, which I was, I said these kids in the first year were lying. They weren't telling the truth. And then somebody said to me, how come they were liars in the first year but not the second year? Why did they become truthful in year two? I couldn't answer that question. So they were really talking about, well, this is just a presentation problem. I want to present myself as good. Why not in year two? So let's go to somebody who's not going to be, well, I already said this. Let's go to some kids who obviously weren't worried about presenting themselves well. These are the kids who in year one say, yeah, I have used. So we look at those kids and we say, well, have you used it in the past 12 months? These are all the kids who in the first session said, yes, I have, but whose parents said no, or whose parents also said, yes, I think my kid has used these drugs. Notice I'm being tentative here because a lot of the parents didn't know, even though they suspected it. They never approached the child. This is what happens in year two. About 85% of the kids who are using in year one, whose parents say, yeah, I think he was using. They say they continue to use in year two, about 85% of them. That's not much of a drop. How about the kids who say, yeah, I was using in year one, yeah, I was using. But in year two, they say, no, I quit. I haven't used anything for a whole year. Why not? Well, they might have got sick, they might have got caught. Their parents screamed and yelled at them, or the coach threw them off the team, or they got kicked out of school. What about those kids? They said, yeah, I used in year one, but I quit in year two, but my parents think I kept using. Or my parents said, no, I don't think he used. I messed that up. These are kids who in year one admitted to use. Their parents said, no, I don't think so. In year two, it dropped to around 62%. It's still high. Think of the drop. We don't have any way of explaining this other than the parents expected you not to do this stuff, and you didn't. So when you really pushed, when you were really pushed, parents said, no, he doesn't do that. I remember this, the motivation for this study came from my family. My mother was a nice Italian woman who only thought positive things about her children, even me. I had a brother who came back from Vietnam, and like most men who came back from Vietnam during that war, he was heavily involved with smoking substances that he shouldn't have been smoking. And I remember sitting with my mother one night talking. He was living with her, having just gotten back. I think his wife had disappeared or something. I don't know. But anyway, he comes back one night, literally staggering from one side of the room to the other. He was so high, it was like very strange to watch. And my mother looks at me, and he sort of staggers up the stairs and goes to bed. And my mother looked at me and she said, I'm really disappointed in your brother. And I didn't want to have this conversation. I said, well, why is that? She said, he told me he would quit smoking cigarettes, and I don't think he quit. That was her explanation of his behavior. She didn't think that kid was using anything. Turns out, in a month or two, he wasn't. So parental expectations actually make a huge difference. So if you have a kid, unless you're absolutely certain about something, don't expect the worst. I'll quit the auxiliary analyses, other than to show you this. And I don't know if this applies to your country or not. When we ask these kids, what's the likelihood that your parents would know if you started using drugs? Among the users, they said 22% of them said my parents were very likely, but look at this, 56%, more than half, said at best they would be only somewhat likely to identify me as drug user. And that's the same percentages almost as the non-users. So the parents didn't know, but even those that did know, is that right? Said, yeah. Seemed afraid to confront their children, seemed afraid to talk to them, say, have you been doing something that you shouldn't be doing? There's nothing wrong with doing it. But a lot of parents in my country don't do it. The other issue is sometimes parents are very bad models. Their own behavior is not very good. Here's a study we did where we already know parental usage of marijuana is related to children's usage. Okay, so if you're a parent and you're smoking drugs and smoking marijuana, your kid is much more likely to do so than if you don't. But what the literature didn't show, which we found out, was that this also was a function of time from quitting, of recency of using the drug. So some parents, we said, when did you quit using, or have you ever smoked marijuana? Some said, no, never. Others said, yeah, I did, but it was 30 years ago, or 20 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 5 years ago, or 5 minutes ago. The 5-minute interviews were interesting. And we related that to the children's usage, and it was a straight line monotonic relationship between recency of usage and likelihood of the kid using. That was impressive. Then we want to know, well, what causes it? We know the data, we know the answer, but what the hell's the question? Here's what happens. Parents who used fairly recently, their kids didn't expect to be punished very much. Parents who used very recently, their children's expectations about what this drug is going to do for me were much more positive. It's going to be a mind-blowing experience. I'm going to learn so much about myself and so forth. And also their attitudes were much more positive. That's why you get a relationship between parental usage, recency of parental usage, and kids' usage. Okay, so parents play a huge role in here. In both cases, both the previous study and the current one, what you're seeing is parents can make a good effect or a bad effect. So it isn't just get your parents involved, you better get them involved correctly if you're going to get them to do something for you. Propositions. What we found was, in another study, all these studies I have at the end, if you're interested, send me a note or something, I'll send them to you. I'll send you the slides and you can look up the study yourself. Don't be lazy. Anyway, what we find is that when we ask kids, when did you start, when was the first time you ever smoked a joint or a marijuana cigarette? And they would tell us at the age. And then we'd say, what were the circumstances? And more than 60%, almost 70% of the time, what the kids said was, well, my friend offered me one. Well, isn't that interesting? So if you keep your kid from having friends, they probably won't smoke drugs. But that's not a very good solution. But here's what we found. We found that if you had close parent-child knowledge of the kid's thoughts and actions, that is, close parent-child relationships, what happened was, why didn't they smoke marijuana as much? Because they didn't get offered. Why didn't they get offered? Because they weren't hanging around with kids who were using that stuff. They were listening to their parents who were saying, don't hang around with that guy because he's going to be trouble for you. So in a very indirect but understandable way, parents played a major role in this. And it worked. So the bottom line on this, warmth matters. It matters if you if you're really warm with your child. I'm going to skip this because it'll take me too long. Here's a path model, a statistical model that deals with alcohol use. We don't stick only to injectables or marijuana and so forth. Okay. So parental control really has to do with watching the kid like a hawk. You just, whatever this kid does, you are watching him or over his shoulder. It's very uncomfortable to be a kid in that kind of a family. Also, but you have parental warmth, you have parental alcohol use. We were interested. This study goes over almost 20 years. Okay, it's a longitudinal study. The same parents and the same kids are involved in this study. Multiple measurements. This is a rich data source, and we've got it. It costs us a lot of money to get our hands on it. What did we find? We found that parental control and parental warmth. Let's look at parental warmth. Parental warmth has a negative effect on ease of access. So, ease of access of the drug, of alcohol in this case. So if you're in a warm relationship with your parents, it's harder for you to get hold of alcohol, except that the parent gives it to you. You know, at a family gathering or things of that sort, which, by the way, as you'll see, is probably the wrong thing to do, at least in the United States, because it is related to a lot of bad things. We're interested in binge drinking. We're also interested in getting arrested when you're 30 years old. These are kids now. So you've got strong relationships between parental control and parents' use perceptions. Strong relationships between parental warmth and parents' use perceptions. That is, do I think this is a bad thing, or do I think, kids has a drink, it's not a big deal. Okay? And also between parents' own alcohol use. So if a parent uses alcohol a lot, the kid has an easier access to alcohol himself. Well, of course he does, because your old man has left the drink laying around. You think, I'll give it a try. The accessibility is immediate. Okay? Ease of access, as you can see, has an effect on adolescent use, as does parental use perceptions. Adolescent use has a strong causal relationship to binge drinking in college. And binge drinking in college has a relatively strong relationship to binge drinking to arrest record, but it's working in the proper way. It's lowering the likelihood of all these things happening. Parental control, not so good. And this study was one of the few that we published. Usually when you publish a study, it always comes back for revision by the editors. This one went right in. We sent it to the journal, the good one, and they said, okay, we'll take it. That's the second time in my whole career that's happened. So what do we do to mount a successful campaign? First, work to overcome resistance, then use the equip model. Engage your audience, question existing pro-drug attitudes if they are there, undermine this answer, inform, tell people what, using strong messages, strong proof about why they're wrong, why you should change this idea, and then persuade. You incentivize adoptions. You give them an incentive for taking in your idea rather than listening to their own friends or whatever. Why should it be adopted? That's not so hard if, in fact, they have the right friends. Do not overpromise or overthreaten. Don't create ads that people find disgusting, because they won't watch them. Don't threaten me. You threaten me, I don't want to listen to you. Especially if I'm engaged in the activity, you're hurting me. That's not reinforcing. So I'm going to turn you away. Your message is too punishing. I'm going to just figure out different ways of thinking about things. Fear-arousing ads usually fail. Unbelievable ads usually fail because they generate resistance to later persuasion campaigns. So every time you try to persuade someone and fail, it makes it harder for me to come in and clean up your mess. Right? And I keep telling some of my friends who are engaged in this field exactly that. I say, now you made my life much more difficult. Why don't you do it right? They like that a lot. Disgusting communications are not revisited. You don't want to watch something disgusting. And I can't persuade you with one ad, right? It's too hard. You need frequency of exposure in media in order to make an effect. That's the way the media work. For youth campaigns, involve the parents if possible. If you're dealing with kids, get the parents involved. They can really be good if they know what to do. Make sure they're acting right. Engage the parents if possible. If not, make it possible. Thank you.
Muchas gracias al profesor Crano por esta excelente demostración de cómo pensar los problemas relacionados con comunicación